But to continue our conversation, we are very, very happy to be joined once again by Omar Baddar, who's a Palestinian-American political analyst based in Washington, D.C. Omar, thank you so much for being back with us.
Of course, it's always good to be with you.
You know, I wanted to get your thoughts on something I saw just a few minutes ago, a study that came out today. This is a report from Middle East Eye that 81% of academics in the United States who work on Middle Eastern issues have said they've been self-censoring on what they say about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or that's how it was framed in the article, because, you know, they're afraid of being targeted. I mean, what does that say about the climate we're in? Because we're hearing, you know, so much about, well, in Congress, you know, the different things, rising anti-Semitism, and of course, you know, we should all be opposed to anti-Semitism. I think that goes without saying. But nonetheless, it's almost like this is not even being told, this other side of the story here.
Yeah, it's an absolutely horrific and racist climate that really is the only way to understand it. It's a climate in which we are obligated, and frankly, rightly so, to be concerned about the lives of Israelis, but complete and total disregard for Palestinian life in a situation in which Palestinians are literally experiencing genocide at the hands of the Israeli government in Gaza. Massive massacres, deaths by the tens of thousands. We've crossed the threshold of over 7,000 children already, but that is not part of the conversation about safety. The only time we talk about safety is what slogan makes certain people feel what way on college campuses. It's completely insane. I mean, when you look at the numbers of people who have been fired, the number of people who have experienced violence as a result of standing up for Palestinian human rights, you have a 6-year-old who was stabbed to death. You have the 3 young men in Vermont who are wearing kufias, college students who were shot because of it. It is an incredibly anti-Palestinian climate, and it is absolutely a climate in which people who want to cheerlead this genocide can do so openly. They have the backing of the majority of people in Congress and effectively the policy of this administration. And the people who are opposing the slaughter of thousands upon thousands of Palestinian children are the ones who have to say so quietly or anonymously or being careful about exactly how they phrase what they're saying. It's a completely insane climate in which members of Congress, we saw the censure today of Jamal Bowman. We saw it before with Rashida Tlaib. In the case of Rashida, for merely saying free Palestine. Meanwhile, members of Congress who are calling for a genocide in Gaza, saying flatten all of Gaza, describing all Palestinians as Nazis, nobody says a word about it. This is just part of accepted discourse. It is frankly, a frightening climate in this country right now. And it speaks volumes about how deeply entrenched racism remains. You know, we talk about what happened to Native Americans, something in the past, as if it's history that the United States is ashamed of. And if it were to happen again now, of course, we'd react differently. But it is unfolding in Palestine as we speak. And the entire political class is completely supportive of this idea of obliterating and displacing an indigenous population. It's really shameful.
You know, Ahmad, I have relatives whose names I won't say because they're all terrified right now. They're terrified of not just having their reputations destroyed or losing jobs. They're terrified for their own physical safety. So it's stunning to me when I see it's almost like the more Palestinians are murdered, the more genocide Israel carries out, the more these privileged white people, frankly, in the US at Ivy League institutions, in boardrooms, celebrities like Amy Schumer, I don't know, whatever, we can name them all, the more they seem to feel unsafe. It's really shocking to me. I have one relative who is terrified to wear the keffiyeh right now because these 3 boys were murdered in Vermont. It's like up is down and black is white, and the safety of Arabs, obviously not just in Palestine or in the region, but the safety of Arabs in America is not being taken seriously at all. They are the ones who feel unsafe as far as I can tell. And they are being gaslit in an insane way into shutting up, basically, and prioritizing the feelings of people who support genocide. That's more of a statement than a question. I'm just very angry right now. But please feel free to respond to any of what I just said.
Sure. I mean, look, thankfully, 2 of the boys in Vermont survived with relatively minor injuries, and one of them is unfortunately paralyzed, which is incredibly heartbreaking. But I don't think these things are unrelated. I think that we live in a climate in which the more obvious Israeli crimes become, the more natural outcry there is about the extent of the horrifying violence that we're witnessing. You have the opposition coordinating these efforts, trying to pass resolutions equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism and whatever else. It is absolutely an effort to distract from the overwhelmingly horrific violence that everybody's watching on their screens. It is as if that us witnessing that violence is a threat to a particular narrative and a particular set of policies that people on the other side go insane to try to shut down the conversation about it because they can no longer win the conversation on merit. It's been just an avalanche of lies by the Israeli government trying to justify precisely what they're doing right now. And it is frankly incredible that even in a climate in which media coverage is absolutely horrific, and even when American policy and the entire political class is pursuing absolutely disgusting policies from left to right, you have a majority of Americans still supporting a ceasefire. That really speaks volumes about the horrors of Israeli policy, that even in the face of such shielding and cover that we're witnessing in the United States, people can still see through that bullshit and can tell that this is a policy that nobody should be supportive of and that this killing has to come to an immediate end. There is no world in the universe in which we can justify the massacring of civilians by the tens of thousands in the name of security. That just does not add up. Unless, of course, your position is openly that the lives of Israelis matter and the lives of Palestinians don't, which appears to be the policy of the Biden administration and much of Congress. That is the reality.
No, it is the reality. I mean, it's, I mean, it almost, you feel through the looking glass. It's like, I've started calling it the leak industrial complex. I feel like every day I open the news and I see some quote, you know, from some U.S. official, well, we're telling them to do less of this. Earlier today, they were saying, we told them it should end in weeks instead of in months. And all these things that seem to be speaking to the fact that they recognize that, you know, 66% of people think that they're headed in the wrong direction, you know, at bare minimum, but they continue to do it. I mean, I guess Ron already spoke to it. I mean, it seems like almost a gaslighting coming out of the White House with the way they're describing this. But I guess the point I'm making is, I mean, I guess I know the answer to this question, but I think it deserves to be said. I mean, do they deserve any credit here? Because they're obviously trying to distance themselves from the worst of the worst with these leaks that they're giving to every newspaper.
Yeah, and it's incredibly weak what they're currently offering that they're trying to get applause for. It is Biden and Harris and the defense secretary getting on TV and saying the civilian casualties are unacceptable. It's too much. Israel must do more to minimize civilian casualties. And Israel responds by massacring more civilians. On the day that these statements were made, the next day, Israel killed more than 700 Palestinians in a 24-hour period. So the message from Netanyahu to these statements is go to hell. We don't care what you have to say. And then our government's response is to keep sending them more bombs. So frankly, these kinds of pronouncements are completely hollow. And it's a little bit of Netanyahu kind of having a read on the political climate in the US and knowing that Biden will not go past a certain point because he knows he does not want to pick a fight with Congress, virtually the entire Republican Party, and even a majority of the Democratic Party that is backed by AIPAC over this issue. So they know that Biden has a line that he will not cross for his own domestic considerations. And it is our job to make sure that that balance shifts in the other direction, that the domestic consideration shows that this kind of support for genocidal violence that, you know, that every person of conscience should have a minimal understanding of how this cannot go on and cannot be supported. If you want to continue down that policy, there has to be a price to pay. And we need to make sure that this price is actually paid.
You also have, I don't know if you saw this, I saw there's all these Israel lobbying groups from AIPAC to other more supposedly liberal ones are coming together to form some sort of October 7th, like disinfo coalition to push against what they call disinformation about October 7th. I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but to me, it suggests that, you know, these Israel lobbying groups work very closely with the Israeli government. That perhaps the Israeli government is trying to build some sort of apparatus to push for a long war. The Israelis are saying that this could take nine months to a year. And it seems like, and you know, a couple months ago, I thought there would be a limit from the Biden administration. But so far, what I have seen repeatedly is they're saying no red lines. They're using zero leverage to get Israel to follow any of the so-called advice they've been giving them about minimizing civilian casualties. And we keep hearing there's a timeline, but the timeline keeps being pushed further and further. And we see there seem to be no red lines. Like the only reason Israel hasn't been able to push Palestinians in Gaza into the Sinai is because Egypt says no. The U.S. literally went on a tour across the region to try to push for that. And now you see the Israelis saying they want to go after Lebanon. And you see America dispatching its officials to try to get the Lebanese to agree to ridiculous things that they're not even capable of enforcing, like pushing Hezbollah back to the Litani River. I mean, and just on and on and on. It doesn't seem like there are any red lines. You saw Matt Miller yesterday in front of the International Press Corps refuse to condemn Israel allowing premature babies to starve to death and leave their bodies to decompose for 17 days. I mean, I don't know. I'm starting to feel like maybe it's a little naive to think that the Biden administration has a time limit here. I don't know. Please feel free to push back against that. But at this point, so much has happened that I didn't think was possible that, I don't know if I can believe the idea that, there's 2 or 3 weeks left of this before Biden says no more.
No, look, I think you're right in the sense that I'm sure Biden would love for the slaughter to stop. The question is, what is he willing to do to stop it? And the answer is very little. He's willing to privately, in conversations with a genocidal, racist, lunatic government, privately tell them, can you please cut this out? And when the answer is no, then what? And that seems to be the situation we're stuck in. The answer is no, and Biden is not going to do anything about it. There's almost irony in the fact that the Israeli government wants to put together a response to misinformation on October 7th, when in fact the Israeli government was the biggest spreader of misinformation about the events that unfolded on October 7th. They were caught lying about it over and over and over and over. And then when you get to the point to where maybe there is a bit of overreach on the other side of people pretending no atrocities were committed, I think that is a bit of an overreach. But frankly, the people to blame for that is the government that has been spreading lies about it. You can't blame people for distrusting some of the details that are emerging, given the fact that they've lied so extensively about 40 beheaded babies. Turns out there were not even 40 babies killed, period, let alone beheaded. Talking about all kinds of inflammatory details of babies being put in ovens and whatever else. And it is quite clear and transparent that all of that was aimed at providing cover to what Israel is doing in Gaza. And I want to be very clear about what Israel is doing in Gaza, because liberal discourse in the United States suggests that what Israel is actually doing is trying to kill Hamas, and inadvertently they're forced to kill so many Palestinian civilians because what else are they going to do? This is the only way they can actually get it done. But in reality, Israel's goal is the destruction of Gaza and its civilian population. This is not a byproduct of Israeli policy. This is Israeli policy. They've alluded to it many, many different times, talking about, the population of Gaza should know that the gates of hell have been opened on them, talking about how accuracy is not really important. Their emphasis is on damage. The statements are just quite numerous about the fact that this is what they want to do. And it's Israel's mentality of what deterrence actually means. What they mean when they say deterrence is that anytime an Israeli is killed, the recipe for Palestinians is you have to live imprisoned, confined, without rights. We can take your land whenever we want to. We can bomb you whenever we want to. We control every aspect of your life. And if you ever respond with violence, we're going to kill so many of you that you're going to regret that decision. That is the Israeli recipe for how it treats Palestinians. And acting as if Palestinian civilian casualties are an inadvertent accident of Israeli policy is incredibly naive, when it's quite clear to anyone who's been following this that Israel's goal is the destruction of Palestinian civilians in what in their empty, idiotic minds think is an act of deterrence, when the history shows that every time, the more violent they've gotten with Palestinians, the more violent the response has gotten, because this kind of violence and genocidal destruction of huge areas and the denial of water, this creates the very despair and frustration and resentment that produces people who want to take up arms and fight back by any means. And if we're going to get to a situation in which if Israel took the security of its citizens seriously at all, the obvious road to a more secure society in the future is one in which Palestinians can live free lives on their own land with their full human rights, because that is the only way you're going to lead to a situation. You need minimal justice in order to move to a situation in which peace, a meaningful, long-lasting peace, can be a possibility. And that is not how the Israeli government is heading right now.
No, I appreciate that very much. As always, Omar Baddar, Palestinian-American political analyst based in Washington, D.C. We really, really appreciate you giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Center.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.